I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And Juliet Grames, I don't even remember when you and I first met. I feel like it's been decades because you and I have both been in the book business for more than a minute.
Yeah, I think it was 38 years ago last September.
Okay, that sounds about right. That really, yeah, that sounds about right. The new novel, The Lost Boy of, wait for it, Santa Chionia.
You did it! You did it!
Excellent. I'm so delighted. I love this book. You've written a literary mystery. It is your second novel. Obviously, the first was a B&N Discover pick, The 7 or 8 Lives of Stella Fortuna, which we will probably come back to at some point in this conversation. But I want to talk to you about this new novel set in 1960 in a part of Italy that I am super not familiar with. Not that I'm, I've been to Milan and the mountains north of Milan, but like southern Italy, haven't been there yet. Hope to get there someday. But will you just set the place for us and then we'll come back to the people?
Well, one of the reasons this part of Italy is so fun to write about is because most people haven't been there. And the other part that's really fun about this is that the vast majority of Italian Americans, we actually draw our ancestry from the south of Italy. So it's not only a place we don't think of, it's the undiscovered country. Is super, super fun to read about and to tour if you're a little bit brave. But it's also culturally connected to us. Like this is this continuum of our immigration narrative and the Italian diaspora narrative that has haunted and intrigued me my whole life. And now that has created 2 books that I absolutely, was on fire to write. It was cool. So I will say my grandmother was born in Calabria in 1920. So I do have a personal connection to this region of Italy. And when I was researching my first novel, which was based on her life, in order to sort of recreate this lost period of time, this is a remote region of Italy that hasn't been written about. It's a place where a lot of our immigrant ancestors didn't have access to literacy, so they didn't get really to write their own stories. So in order to recreate this historical novel, I had to do a lot of interviews. And I ended up interviewing over 100 people in the Italian diaspora during this process, both here and in Italy. And the stories that came out about immigrant men who had gone missing during that dangerous passage, like men who had sailed away to the United States or other places, Australia, Germany, and then just they were never heard from again, especially in this super dangerous first decade of the 20th century when these patterns were not as well established and there weren't a lot of protections for immigrants. It was really, I found it very haunting. Another thing that I found really haunting in my research is the number of ghost towns that there are in Calabria.
Yeah. Okay. Because again, we're in a place, and I love the setting of The Lost Boy, but what is going on? People are living with their goats literally in the house. And I know you well enough to know this was not a detail that you decided to make up and have fun with.
Yeah, no.
Can we just talk about the housing? Can we talk about how these towns are built?
Yeah, totally. So most of Italy is a peninsula of coasts that go precipitously up into mountains. So you get a lot of gorgeous mountain towns, right? We've all been dreamed of going to those towns. But in Calabria specifically, there have been 3,000 years of colonial history where different raiders different empires have come and tried to colonize those coasts. They're so fertile and full of riches. And so defensively, the Calabrese settled these mountaintops and they built these villages that are really hard to access. They're deliberately remote, right? And actually, up until the 1920s, when Mussolini had a sort of state building project where he put together a bunch of roads to connect them, most of these villages were not connected by road. Like if you wanted to get to the doctor in the next closest town, you were walking through the woods. If you didn't know exactly what path to take through the woods, you had to worry about brigands. It was very rustic, remote, inaccessible. In my humble opinion, as I learned about these places, just the absolute perfect backdrop for a murder mystery.
So it's 1960. We're with an American, Franchesca, who is there to do the right thing. She's there to open a nursery school in a community that is not sold on outsiders and certainly not sold on all of these things are not. But 1960, right? A whole new era.
Yeah, it's a super exciting time. Francesca's character, her biodata is actually inspired by a real historical figure, which helped me pin the point in time that I wanted to write about. But I also wanted to write about this moment in world history when we're starting to have a lot of progressive movements, a lot of thoughts about how everyone deserves humanitarianism, everyone deserves safety. And, in wake of World War II and the devastation everywhere, and Italy was very, very badly hit by the war. There was a lot of energy into that. There's a lot of energy in talking about women's rights and what the woman's role in society was. And, Franchesca herself, she was born in 1932. She's 27 when we meet her. She's a product of Barnard College. She is a liberated young woman who really wants to help and make a mark on the world. Mm-hmm. And, she's still battling against the things that these less liberated women in this Italian village have to face every day. For example, her biology is still a limitation for her. But, in Italy at this time, it's a little bit more exacerbated. We're living in a time where women have only recently achieved citizenship during World War II, and where, divorce is still completely illegal. So if you do have an abusive husband, that's really unlucky. There's nothing you can do about it. All of these factors sort of play into my character's ability to make a difference in the way she hopes, which is to, help out with infant and maternal mortality by introducing a healthy hygiene and a nursery school, like a pedagogy, early childcare pedagogy in a village that has never had really access to medicine or to educational structures. So
she's got members of the community saying to her, well, I can't kick the goats out. I have no land. And she's saying, well, you'll have less fleas on your children if you kick the goats out. And, to think of this as 1960, right? Like, this is the kind of sort of description that I think some people are used to seeing associated with Africa and Asia, and certainly not Europe.
I think it's really important, actually, that we look at Europe in this way.
Yeah.
That we, some of us white Americans can really be served to remember that the countries that we came from had hardships.
Right.
And I think that talking about the immigrant continuum, for me, I can lean on my own Italian origin and really put a microscope up to that Italian diaspora experience. But it's really a point of emotional and intellectual connection with the immigrant experience today. And I encourage people to read and think as deeply about their own immigrant forebears as well as the modern immigrant movements together. I think it's really important. But
I do. I totally do. And I have to say that's part of the fun of reading this book for me, right? Because I'm like, hello, Italy. Hello, 1960. Hello, like, we're on the cusp of this grand American experiment, right? Like, we're about to send a man to the moon and all this other stuff. And like, I think at this point, IBM has created the first sort of computer, and computers were run on punch cards and took them entire rooms. Like 1960 is that moment where everything's, and you're introducing us to folks. Yes.
Yeah. So those details, I love research, but I mentioned I did model her after a historical figure. That figure was a woman named Anne Cornelissen. She was an American writer, a Guggenheim Fellow, who went to Italy she moved there in 1954. So same as Franchesca. And she was a Vassar graduate, and she went over there to study archaeology and ended up instead working for Save the Children. Save the Children is a British nonprofit founded during after World War I to help, children who are in war-torn areas. And so Franchesca is fictional. She's an Italian American, so she's more drawn from my own bio there. But and she is working for a fictitious organization called Child Rescue. But I haven't endeavored to hide that identity.
Right.
Very much. I admire Save the Children. I think they're fantastic. And so Anne Cornelissen wrote about Save the Children's policies at this time when they're opening nursery schools. And I thought these little factors were so interesting. It's like, if you do have your animals sleeping with the children at home, then you are more likely to have lice and diseases transmitted between humans and animals, et cetera. But at the same time, if you don't own any land except the one room hut that you live in, where are you going to put your animals? And they're a source of your food. If you can't keep your chickens under your bed, how are you going to get eggs? That's your only source of protein. These are real questions. In 1960, they're real questions.
No one's bopping down to the grocery store. There is no Tesco.
No.
There's no ShopRite.
No.
You really do. And it's a really hard scrabble experience. And we sort of meet everyone right as there's been a flood. And there have been many floods in this neck of the woods, but there's another flood. And a set of bones have been revealed. And that's not giving anything away. This really kicks everything off. We are obviously spoiler-free in this conversation, but we find a body.
We do.
And Franchesca is not there. I mean, it's this sort of classic trope, I guess, of the not detective. And it's fun. I mean, she does have some moments where I'm like, oh, don't go through that door. But
then she does. Here's the thing. On the one hand, it's really none of her business, the bones, and she shouldn't try to investigate them. But on the other hand, no one else is investigating them. And she's trying to connect with the community around her. And part of that she's navigating is favor doing. This is another thing I learned during my own sort of immigrant detective method acting I've been doing over writing these last 2 books. I've learned a lot of lessons. And one of them is, yeah, you shouldn't go prying into people's business. But on the other hand, you got to build relationships, because if you do, then people want to let you into their stories. And Franchesca doesn't always, she always wants to help out if she's asked.
She means well.
She means so well.
Yeah, she does. It's just she's navigating a space. And there's a character who I'm not going to name, but there's a character who's a man who comes out and says, well, once you figure out this is a matriarchy, everything's fine. And I need to talk to you about this, because this is not a matriarchy. What are we talking about here? I mean, I feel like the men are running all of the things, and theoretically the women could be doing things in the background, but the majority of women we meet, there's like maybe 1 or 2 that is like working behind the scenes and getting what they want and doing how they need to. But a lot of women are still just stuck.
Yeah, Miwa, I'm so interested in this question. I'm so interested in this question. I mean, we get back to that whole, no, women are not equal participants in society. They do not have the same rights at this moment in Italian history. And there are still systemic disadvantages of being in a patriarchy that is also ruled by the Catholic Church.
Right.
Like, this is, church and state. The separation of church and state is such a quaint idea when you're looking at Italy. I mean, you go, this is, if you wanted someone's birth certificate, you go to the town hall.
Right.
But if you want to know about their property deeds, you go to the church. Why does the church get to keep the property deeds? It doesn't make any sense. We're so bound up in this residue of colonial past and of Catholic city-states. So of course, a woman is not on equal footing here.
Right.
And then we have some, without spoiling anything, we have some structures in southern Italy that have in the past been described as, I think, mafia is the word I'm looking for. Yeah, in a highly patriarchal mafia organization, especially an endemic one where, an entire town may or may not be implicated because you can't avoid it if this is, in fact, the situation you live in. What power do women have? They are slaves of the marriages that they're sold into, sometimes at age 13 or 14. They are slaves to the children they bear within those marriages, who are at risk if they try to oppose these structures. It's very, the fact of those patriarchal mafias, even to this day, are very extreme. And I actually highly recommend a book that came out a couple of years ago by a journalist named Alex Perry called The Good Mothers, which is a really searing modern depiction of 3 women, Ndrangheta wives. So the Ndrangheta is the Calabrian mafia, and it's a huge and insidious organization that is, there's more to talk about though. So all that being said, this whole organization doesn't work if there aren't female integers that are supporting it. This is still 50% of the population.
Right.
If all of the women threw down their wooden spoons and opposed it, that would be really hard. It would take a lot of bodies before the cannon to make it work, but it wouldn't be able to proceed. So you do have women have to be involved to make it work. it's really interesting.
And there are a couple of characters. Yeah, there are a couple of characters that readers will meet where they'll understand exactly what you're talking about. I want to go back to Franchesca's landlady for a second.
Oh, yeah.
Because they become a little bit of a, well, not technically a Holmes and a Watson, but, you kind of need a sidekick. But you also need someone to help you understand the space that you're in. Clearly, Franchesca does not know all of this stuff.
I think it's great when detective characters have a real helpmeet, especially if that helpmeet constantly heckles and tortures them with some, low to high grade prank playing and general lifestyle criticism and constant barrage of sort of Italian momming. And Chica, her landlady, is not, in fact, a mom, but she definitely steps into a scolding and a mom-like role with Franchesca, and I just that developed really naturally from page one. I sat down to write this book, and I knew who Chica was right away. She emerged very clearly. I'm not saying she's modeled after anybody I know. I'm definitely not saying that.
Okay, well, that's fair, but she's still really entertaining. But you have always said that you're a planner. This I remember from conversations we had while you were still writing Stella and even just after, where you're like, oh no, I map out everything.
Yes.
And Stella Fortuna had, a little bit of a magical, mystical spin to it, right?
Yeah.
And had some stuff going on. If you haven't read it, please go back and find the 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna. It's fun, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful because some other stuff happens, but
that means a lot to me.
It is fun. But writing a book like that is very different from writing a mystery, because you kind of have to have a really direct idea of where you're going, right? Even though you're planning and you're thinking and you're basing it on your family story, and this is more like, well, you know the place.
Yeah.
But I want to talk about the creation of this book specifically because you also are the editorial director of Soho Press, and part of that means you're running Soho Crime. So mystery and thrillers and crime novels are kind of your bag. And so you're switching gears sort of, but not. I mean, it was a bigger shift, I think, between Stella Fortuna and your day gig than this book and the day gig. Yeah.
So, Miwa, you've hit the nail on the head here. I knew I wanted to try to write a mystery novel because I was fascinated by this disappearance of immigrant men. It seemed like perfectly cast for a crime novel. But I also felt that the stakes were pretty wretchedly high here. I thought if I didn't execute something on the very highest level to pass, the bar for crime fiction readers who are super deeply read within the genre.
Yes.
And you really can't fool them by just coming up with something quickly. So I knew that the stakes were really high. I knew it had to be perfect. And yes, I do very much like to plan things. So I want to show you something I've never shown anyone before. It's gotten very dusty on my shelf since 2020 when I did this project. But before I started writing, I decided I needed to feel fully, armed and ready to do battle against this task. So here's volume 1. This is the Santa Chionia Paese Characteristics and History volume. It's size 10 font and it's double-sided, and I printed and laminated it at Staples. So then after that, I wrote this. This is volume 2. This is the 200,000 word plot, bullet pointed with background story details in it. The book itself is luckily it's not that long. It's only 150,000 words. So I really felt when I was going into the actual sitting down to write this part that I had an idea of where I was going with the story.
Clearly, but it's not a tiny cast. I mean, yeah, Franchesca is the heart of the whole thing. And certainly Chica is there for not all of it, but you do, we meet a lot of folks in different ways, in different places.
Have you ever lived in a village?
I have not, but I mean, those British mysteries, right, where everyone knows everyone and lives 4 feet away. I mean, I've seen a couple of those. So.
I lived in my grandmother's village for a while when I was working on Stella. And since then, I've had the great privilege of visiting other Calabrian villages and spending some significant time in them. And there's a lot of people in them, and everyone's lives are like this. They're like this. So the one piece of reality that I had to completely abandon in constructing this village is not giving everyone the same damn name, because that is
okay.
that would have been true realism. You know, as you mentioned, the skeleton is the bone of contention here, as it were. We have a found body. We don't actually, it's not a whodunit, because we don't know what it is. We don't know if a murder has taken place. And so Franchesca's really got a sort of triple investigation that has to happen, where she has to figure out what story was being covered up and who the identity of the bones are before she knows who the culprits are or who the suspects might be. So I wanted to create a super tricky plot. I wanted to have fun with that. I wanted to reward, their golden age puzzle mystery fans. And
yep.
I've been a crime editor now for 15 years, and those books are few and far between. And when you find one, they are so much fun to read. So I had the luxury of time with this, and I wanted to build that tricky plot to reward those fans. And it was really, really fun to do. But there's a large cast of characters. However, I hope that this is the book. Mm-hmm. I hope your readers will enjoy this very handy character list that we put at the back.
Yes.
It's very useful.
It is. But also, I didn't really, because, when I read it, I was reading it absolutely. I had your name, I had the title of the book, and I was like, right, we're good. So I sort of pieced my way through some of the people, and I was like, yeah, I know who you are. I get who you are. I get where you fit into the world of things. So I don't want people to feel intimidated by the character list, because it's really pretty clear what you're doing and how you're doing it. It is so much fun, this book. It really is. And, it's not like, these bones have been there for a while.
A while. Yeah.
And the people we meet who are sort of laying claims and the red herrings, and you're doing all of this like feinting and dodging and whatnot. But in terms of the characters, obviously, you know who the heart of the thing is. And you give her some people at home, and you give her some people elsewhere, and she has her people. It's not like she's running around the world all by herself. But how much cast did you have to jettison? Because I feel like there might have been more people, and you were like, yeah.
There were. Yeah, there were. Look, there's a lot in this Bible I didn't get to write. So, in fact, that's great, because having generated all of this world, doing this world building work, helped me write with a sense of authority. When I had to pick an adjective, for example, I knew the point of view of the person I needed that adjective for. I knew what Franchesca's attitude toward them would be. I could really, color in a sentence based on the things that I didn't get to tell the reader. So it was really fun.
So world building, right? Like, this is a word we toss around with sci-fi and fantasy really quickly, anything that feels slightly out of the ordinary. I'm the one who's always arguing that world building is like also sitting at your kitchen table. Like, do I believe that I'm in a suburb of X, Y, or Z place? Or do I believe I'm in a high rise or a whatever? Do I believe where the author has dropped me, right? And you were a history major, not an English major. You were a history major. And I think part of this world building comes from not just being a reader and working in the industry, but also being trained as a historian.
So I definitely love to research, and I maybe love that more than writing. But I want to, don't tell, but I want to get back to the first thing you said about sci-fi fantasy, because here's the truth. I'm a genre apologist. That's my role in life. That's what I do professionally.
Wait, what?
It's true. I go around professionally and I tell people that crime fiction is really great. However, in my private life, I go around and I read a lot of sci-fi fantasy. And I will tell you why sci-fi fantasy is so great and important. And I confess, I don't read a ton of romance, but I'm also here to tell you that romance is a really important genre. Each of those genres tests our social fabric and introduces new ideas in a way that then become mainstream. And to undervalue the service that any of those genres play in our wider literary culture, or to denigrate them or poo-poo them or think that they're lesser than literary fiction, which, like, don't get me started, because that's its own genre and I have things to say. So I really wanted to honor my sci-fi fantasy roots with this book. And it's not speculative. There's no magic in it, but I did get to create an imaginary place so that, and I'm going to tell you, I honestly drew inspiration from Tolkien with that. When I was creating this village and other sci-fi fantasy roots of mine, I'm not going to name here, but people who know me well already know what they are. And I do think that in the same way that crime fiction makes a contract with its genre readers, where they are going to see how justice affects a society over a social issue, and they know that they're going to have satisfying interrogation of such an issue there. So really rewarding reading experience. I believe that in the sci-fi fantasy contract between authors and readers know that they're going to be in a place that's completely alien to them, but they're going to understand it. That's the writer's job, right? The writer's job is to take a completely alien place and make it accessible. And I sure needed to do that for Santa Chionia for a lot of the reasons you already mentioned. But I frankly believe that every author should be doing that in every book. And I wish more people read sci-fi fantasy and they took inspiration from those works.
I interviewed Kristen Hanna years ago, and actually The Lord of the Rings is an influence for her too, given the way he writes about friendship. I was not expecting that answer, but I totally get it. And that's the thing, like all of these books have a place, right? I mean, hi, bookseller, like this is what I do, right? But hey, world building in all seriousness, you took a leave of absence from your day gig to move to the mountains of Italy. I need to know how long you were there. I don't remember exactly when I remember seeing but like details, please.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have a very forbearant boss, and I have to thank her, my Soho publisher, because there was the first one, which was 1 month, but I have done it several times since. So, and to live in the Aspromonte Mountains, which is where this book is set, it is such a specific lifestyle. It's a very remote and inaccessible string of villages deep in this very high massif. And on top of that, some of the villages are so remote that they still speak this language called Greco, which is in fact, it's grammatically drawn from classical and Byzantine Greek, which is what everyone in this area spoke up until about 1600. And then it's been fused with Calabrese words and inflections. And there's so much that is so particular, very specific to this area. And so I've been lucky enough to go and spend time, 3 different 2-week periods in that area. It was great.
How do you get there though? This is what I need mechanics. I need actual logistics, because I'm like, how do you even do it? So
it's not easy. You can try to fly into the airport at Reggio Calabria, but they don't have many flights. So I suggest you fly to Lamezia Terme, which is 10 minutes from my grandmother's village. It's the airport in the middle of Calabria, and then you rent a car. The other thing you can do is you can take an 8-hour train from Rome if you'd like, but you definitely need a car or a donkey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was waiting for the donkey because sorry, I kept imagining like tiny, tiny winding roads and sloping streets and maybe you could get one of those teeny tiny trucks through there. But when you're in Europe, obviously the cars are very much a different size from the US. Because you can't get anything anywhere. I'm like, are you walking the rest of the way? What is happening?
You're walking. So Santa Chionia is a fictitious town that I made up, but I drew its beating heart is this actual town called Africo.
Okay.
And I've been obsessed with this town for a long time. It's a ghost town deep in the Aspromonte that was forcibly abandoned in 1950. Okay. So in Santa Chionia, the citizens in 1960 are looking at what happened to their neighbors in Africo who left their town, and they're trying to make the decision of whether they're going to leave or stay as well, right? So Africo was so far, it was 6 hours on foot to the next closest town. There were no roads there. No car could ever come in with medical supplies because there was no road to get there. So, if you did need medical care, if you were, say, a woman in labor and you were having trouble and needed to see a doctor, they would have to strap you to a pallet and 6 men would carry you on their backs down this, very precipitous cliffside road to the next closest town. People lived this way. And in this very remote, inaccessible, the word that was often used was impoverished lifestyle, because they didn't have the resources or the access to things like education or medicine or jobs, but also in this community, there's this sense of rebelliousness, of an intense identity, of a resistance to the state structures that have oppressed them for hundreds of years. It's a very, very interesting cocktail of lifestyles. And I was lucky enough to, I mean, this is still within living memory. So I was lucky enough to be able to interview a number of people who were born, grew up in Africo. It's now called Africo Vecchio because it's old Africo. New Africo has been moved to the water. And some great people, took me on a tour through this ghost town. We had to take a Jeep, and the last hour of this road, this mountain road, it was impassable. We actually had to walk for 2.5 hours to get to the center of town, which was completely overgrown with, brambles coming out of windows, and there were feral cows wandering around. They would wander in and out of the empty church. I'm not kidding here. And they also had, this really struck me, these boar pigs. So pigs that the residents had left behind, who have mated with the Aspromonte, the mounted forest boars.
Mm-hmm.
And they're really interesting looking, and they would scream at you if you walked by. And I should also say that the forest there is so dense that, this is the birthplace of the 'Ndrangheta. If you remember this mafia, they're the ones behind the kidnapping of John Paul Getty III back in the 70s. And the law enforcement couldn't find him for 5 months because these forests are so impenetrable. They knew how to hide. There's nothing a police person could do.
Okay, we have to go back to the feral cows for a second.
Oh, yeah, feral cows.
Because how are they like cow size? Like, these are not tiny cows, right? These are like cow-sized feral cows walking around the mountains.
Yep.
And boar pigs are not little, right?
No.
So wait, are the pigs still smaller than the cows? Or are they all roughly equivalent? What are we talking here?
The pigs are smaller than the cows. I will say the pigs are really large, but the cows are pretty skinny because, I mean, they're not grazing in grass. They are trampling over these cliff faces. And here's another thing: as we're taking this 2.5-hour walk, down these rocky gullies to the center of this ghost town, there was this femur like this, huge femur. Yeah. And I was like, what is this? And my guides, who were all, I say boys, ragazzi, they were in their 40s and 50s, but they had been born in the new state, and they were taking me back to their ancestors, like, old town. And they're like, oh no, the cows, they're really clumsy, and they fall off the mountains, and their bones are picked clean by ants. And I was like, well, this is going in my book.
Mm-hmm. Also, no goats, though. What? I thought goats and mountains all went together. What is this?
Well, they took their goats with them.
Oh, got it. Okay.
You love your sheep. You respect your goats.
Okay.
I learned a lot about shepherding during this time because this was the only real income available to people who lived in these mountains. They ate goat milk ricotta. That was like a main source of food. And they foraged for mountain herbs, and they grew lentils in their gardens because those would grow in the dry mountain soil. And then, when it was time to kill a goat, then you could have goat meat. But this diet, it's really different than what you think of as Italian food. We're not talking about, piles of pasta. And so goat herding was super central to the lifestyle there. And another thing that happened was Italy in 1930 passed an environmental protection law where they rezoned the Aspromonte forest. They said the goats were too destructive for the forest. So people had to pay a tax for every goat head that they kept for the environmental damage. But these are people who don't have money. I don't mean they're poor. I mean, they literally don't have money. They don't have commerce. They don't have any contact with villages that have money. So essentially that law in 1930 creates a cultural sort of apocalypse where everyone is now illegal. Everyone is a criminal in the eyes of the government. There's already a rumor that people from Calabria they're all brigands, right? There's all this mafia culture and lore there. And it definitely troubled the lifestyle in Africa for those subsequent 2 decades of the 20th century where they were allowed to stay in their homes, where they still didn't have income. And they were constantly avoiding law enforcement because of the goats that they relied on. Created a really interesting moment when that flood came in 1950 and they all left. And I've tried to borrow some of the compelling social factors of African history to use in Francesca's discovery of this body.
Obviously we're predating the internet, right, with Franchesca in 1960, but also, like, the organization that's sending her there, they don't have that much information either. So she really does not know this place until she's there.
Yeah. And, she's a nerd and she tries to learn about it, but it's deliberately obscure. I mean, people live in Santa Chionia in part because they want to be separate from the rest of the world, which you learn about. And, one thing that really struck me, I think we've all watched The Godfather, and we know about Omerta in terms of Sicilian mafia literature, or the idea that it means men of honor and silence, and etc. Well, it's really funny because in the Calabrian dialect, the way you say the word omerta is umiltà, and it comes from the same origin word as humility, as opposed to secrecy. Those things are related. To be a humble person and to live a secret life where you don't talk to outsiders and where your integrity is sort of tied up in the distance you put between yourself and the problems of the rest of the world. It's something that is really difficult for Franchesca. She's a very sort of outgoing and desiring to connect kind of person. And that's not the character of this village. It is a lot for her. She can't learn that out of a book. She has to learn it the hard way.
Well, I have to say it's fun watching her learn. But I want to switch gears for just a second because, as I mentioned at the top of the show, you are editorial director for Soho Press, and Soho Crime is basically your main project. So how many books are you doing? I mean, Naomi Hirahara's on your list, McHarren's on your list. I know I'm missing other people, so you can fill in the gaps. Yeah. But they're the first two I think of when I think of Soho Crime.
That's so awesome. I've been at Soho going on 15 years now. And, I used to be running the entire crime imprint. And now I'm really lucky that I have so many editors who are contributing to it as well. So it doesn't have to be entirely my bailiwick anymore. But I feel a lot of pride and affection for everyone who's a part of it. So it's just been a real privilege to work with all those people. Yeah.
So how many books are you guys doing collectively a year then for Soho Crime?
So it's about between 24 and 36, either two to three new books a month, depending. Okay. So it's a lot. It's a lot.
It is.
I have a great team. I've got great editors and they're acquiring awesome new things. But yeah, McHarren and Naomi Hirahara are two of mine who you might know. I have some other favorites of yours too, but I feel like if I name any others, it will be showing favoritism, and I love all of my authors.
I totally get it. I totally get it. But I mean, part of why I bring up Naomi, not just because her stuff is fun to read as well, but she's doing something with the internment camps, right? That you're doing similarly here. Because you're talking about immigration, you're talking about women's rights, you're filling in all of the gaps that make history slightly more interesting, right? Like the official, and I'm using air quotes as I say official, the official record isn't complete, and we've always treated it as if it is so, right? Yeah, and it's kind of like she does the same thing where she's like, you think you know everything about the people, and it's just like, why not use crime fiction to tell these stories, right? Like, not everyone is going to want to pick up a giant history, and that's totally fair. I love reading giant histories, but I do really appreciate it when fiction, whether it's genre fiction or not, just uses a real moment as sort of a leaping off point and gives the people space to run with it. That's the thing I need.
I don't think it's a coincidence that my editorial acquisitions are books where an author has come into a crime fiction story with an ideology. They have an about that's really important to them. And also usually where there's some personal connection or inflection to the subject matter. You talk about Naomi is herself a cultural curator of the Japanese American experience and has 30 years of experience as a journalist where she has collected stories, especially about the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II and beyond the aftermath. And it's so personal to her that she was really drawing on that personal well, her book was about this thing that she's passionate about. And, you could say that applies to a lot of the other people I've had the privilege of acquiring and editing, like Sujata Massey, who writes about 1920s Bombay and women's rights there, professional women's rights. And, or Eli Craner, who writes about Arkansas he's from, or Ramona Emerson, who writes about the Navajo reservation and Albuquerque, New Mexico. All of these stories where people have an axe to grind, as well as a compelling mystery, as well as some personal skin in the game. I really thank you for pointing this out, because I feel that way. That's my relationship to my book. And it's clearly the kind of story that I best like to read. So, it's an honor to be mentioned with those people that I've had the privilege of editing.
I also just really like the fact that you get to be on both sides of it, right? You get to work as a publisher and an editor and also as a writer. And I think, it's two separate sets of muscles. And, I'm thinking being a writer probably makes you a better editor in some ways, and being an editor makes you a better writer in some ways.
Well, definitely the second one.
Yeah, okay.
For sure. Yeah. I think a lot of people, I've read a lot of submissions that were not quite ready for publication. And 95% of the time, the issue there is that people don't edit themselves enough. They don't take enough care with their craft before because you write something and it's very satisfying to write type at the end. But that's only 20% of the way through your journey of writing a novel. And I know that because I have been editing books for as long as I have. Mm-hmm. So I think editing other people really has given me the stamina to be able to edit myself, and it has made the difference in my, writing a book versus writing a bag of index cards.
But also it's that balance of narrative voice and sort of pushing us through, like every sentence is pulling us further into the story and further through the story. Well, and I feel like you don't waste setup, right? Like if you tell me something, I'm like, we're going to come. Okay. And it's like sort of the mental checklist as I go through. I'm like, all right, wait, okay.
Thank you. That's very flattering. That's all editorial work. That's just like if you look back at your own prose, you can tighten to the point that you can get the things into their best possible shape. You just have to not give up at the point when you think you're done. You have to keep going, like at least 5 more laps.
So have you started the next thing? I mean, that is conventional wisdom, right? As the new thing comes out into the world, make sure you have the next thing going so that you have something to focus on while all of this stuff happens around publication.
Well, the beauty of my process is that it takes 7 years. So
has it really been that? I guess it has been that long.
No, it's 5 years since Stella came out, but the overlap there is, when you're in that, obviously, Santa Chionia has been done for a long time. We're into the publicity phase. We're talking about the book. I have not been sitting and writing it. During that time when I didn't have those writing obligations, I have been deep in research for book 3. And I'm hoping to start setting pen to paper this fall. But yes, I'm deep into it. It is another Italian story, another Italian crime fiction story. And it is set against the backdrop of World War I in the Alps. The Italian World War I experience is really fascinating to me. And it involves a mysterious violin.
Okay. I'll sit quietly and be patient. All right, maybe not quietly, but I'll be patient.
You've got 5 years to wait. I'll try to speed it up this time.
Take as much time as, the reality is the story takes what the story takes. And there's some writers who can deliver a book a year and that's great. And there's some writers who are like, I'm just actually thinking of Marilyn Robinson, right? Like 24 years between one novel and the second. And I'm like, okay, it was worth the wait.
That's it. That's all that matters.
People write at their own pace. Okay, we're getting dangerously close to spoilers. There's something I really want to ask you about. So, and I'm going to turn off the recording and I'm going to do that there. I'm
here for it. I'm so excited for this part, for when the book goes on sale and I get to talk to people after they've read it.
Right.
I'm so excited.
This is a delight, this book. There's so much happening and there's surprises and it's just, it's always nice when someone writes a book that you get super excited about. But satisfying. It's really, listen, God of the Woods, right? The Liz Moore that's out right now. If you've read God of the Woods and you're looking for the next thing.
Adore her.
I think I have a thing for you. So Juliet Grames, thank you so much for joining us on
Thank you, Miwa.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.